So growing up a hardcore gamer practically as long as I can remember, physical game collecting has always been something that's near and dear to my heart and that I've found a lot of joy in, and just honestly treat it as a hobby. When a new game comes out, part of the experience for me personally has been to go down to the store, look at the box itself, pick it up, and come home and play it. However, we are absolutely in an era where media is no doubt transitioning to primarily, if not all, digital in the future, and there are some interesting data and marquee titles that have recently been spotlighted, generating this conversation online around how close are we really to a potential for a primarily, if not all, digital gaming future. And in today's video, I want to break down and discuss the reason that this is being talked about so prevalently online right now, and also talk about how this could affect Nintendo, their future library of games, and even the current Nintendo Switch games going forward. What's up, Nation? If it's your first time on the channel, make sure you join Sunbro Nation by subscribing below, hit the like button on this video if you enjoy it today, and make sure you turn on your bell notification icon so you're kept up to date with all the newest gaming news. As I mentioned, guys, today we are discussing a topic around where games are headed and really media as a whole, because if you've been around in the gaming space, you've probably seen a lot of push from developers, indies, of course, having that kind of, it's easier to release a digital only game, but even major games getting kind of the treatment of more of a push for digital purchases. Also, the convenience factor, you have to really keep in mind, there is a convenience factor for buying a game digitally and actually being able to download it, not leaving your home, and boot it up and play it. A lot of the games even allowing you to download them ahead of time, so as soon as that server clock hits midnight or wherever you are, it goes live, you can actually hop in and start enjoying your game right then and there. And one topic that did pop up over the weekend that's being discussed a lot online right now is one of the major marquee releases, such as Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, having a physical disc shipped to stores that is available on the shelves right now with only 70 megabytes of data. That is not gigabytes, that is megabytes. This is roughly a 100 gigabyte game, and so essentially they are shipping basically a coupon or a token for you to pop it into your machine and actually communicate with the server to download the completed project, which really signals a strong push for wanting to basically these developers get away from having to release their games digitally or physically rather at all, and going towards that ultimate convenience factor in their eyes of a all digital future, because there are some real benefits at a company standpoint if you do look at it from a revenue and distribution lens. Like, yes, they don't have to figure out how many copies they should produce and ship to these physical retailers, and some of which may not ever be sold. They also don't have to do the production around just getting the game onto a disc to begin with, and in games that are heavily online focused and also having, whether that be DLC expansions or new seasons like you see with stuff with Call of Duty and their online play, there is always going to be new downloadable content that you have to get in and update to experience. So the idea behind releasing something that is technically not a finished game, as you know there's a roadmap of updates to come, makes less sense on certain titles, and we are definitely seeing that as we shift to a bigger focus on a lot of live service type of games, in addition to things that have battle passes or season passes. You get the idea. If the content is evolving and changing, it makes less sense for developers to go out of their way to ship a finalized product on store shelves. Now, all of that said, I still think it's absolutely ridiculous to ship a disc with only 70 megabytes on there when the disc itself is a ultra Blu-ray disc that actually supports up to 100 gigs, and you could just at the very least save the time and data on your internet provider, where some home internet providers have data caps. I unfortunately are one of those people that's the only option where I'm at. My home internet has a data cap on it. I would like to have the option to pop this disc in and knock out 100 gigs of the download from the disc itself, but that is not the option here. But the entire idea that this spawns is how much longer do we actually have as physical game collectors to have the vast majority of games available physically? Because one other interesting chart that you can go over and see from Ars Technica, and this was actually typed up quite a while back, earlier in February, earlier in the year, but you do have some interesting charts around the number of titles that are developed and released in both physical and digital, or the digital only being the green bar here on this first graph, and they go down to break out a lot of different kind of data and numbers here when we're looking at these charts. but you do see things like a higher and higher number of games over the course of time that only ever get digitally released, and their physical release are completely forgotten about or never even a focus to begin with. One title that this happened to me with recently was Sonic Origins, and Sega is notorious for doing that with games like Sonic Mania in the past. Then that game sold fantastic, and they actually did release it physically later on, but the idea of it being a classic collection of Sonic games that a bunch of hardcore gamers that probably grew up in that era would want a physical copy of, and it's actually not available, that was one that for me that stuck out. I want this in my physical collection and I can't get it. We do sometimes see the opposite happen, where a game is very overly successful and it gets a physical edition. As I mentioned, Sonic Mania. In addition to that, we got games like Cuphead most recently. The Cuphead has a great reputation online now. It has a core user base that would like to purchase it physically, and so we ultimately did see a physical copy released. But these are the exception to the rule nowadays, and you do have to have the conversation about how much easier it is for a indie developer to only focus on the production budget of the game itself and not have to deal with retailers and a middleman in terms of actually getting their game to market when it comes to the end consumer, and rather just having the agreement with Nintendo and other companies to launch it on their storefronts. It is a much easier task for these smaller games, and I would argue that we probably see even more indie games because of that digital only release option that we now have, that if you didn't have it at all would actually be a downside, and we would have less total games to play. Now, there's a ton of data you could deep dive and look at on this article that I will have linked in the description down below, and it's really fascinating if you do want to look at it. But the long and short of it is that yes, we are seeing more of a push towards a digital future, faster than I think many people are ready for. And you do have to look around and realize that movies and music are essentially that already. They are mainly digital, if not entirely digital, and the amount of subscription services that we see to watch our content is also rapidly growing. And I think that Game Pass with Xbox and what Microsoft is doing is actually a first attempt at that in the gaming space, and that is why Microsoft is most likely the first console manufacturer that will lean the most heavily into digital only, because it aligns with their Game Pass strategy. Although I don't think Sony is far behind them, with there even being rumors of a PlayStation 5 revision coming out with a optional disc drive, and that's where I think it really does take an interesting turn, because then the physical game collecting is really around only for the people who love and appreciate that as a hobby and want to physically own their games, as opposed to just picking up the digital title for the convenience of being able to have it as part of your library, switch between games seamlessly without getting up and changing the disc. There are a lot of upsides to digital games, and I absolutely see that. And I say that as a physical game collector, and I also say that as a Game Pass subscriber and somebody who does occasionally get digital games, because the deals on them are so crazy that I can't pass it up. One thing to transition the conversation a little bit though is that if you do know history, you know that Nintendo and how they adapt to the times and what is happening on the industry, they are known to be far behind the curve of what is happening. And I do think that we, as Nintendo Switch gamers, will most likely have the longest trajectory of physical supported media on the Switch, and I've even subconsciously made that decision to really focus on my Nintendo Switch game collection when it comes to the physical side of things, and I do find myself buying things digitally on the PS5 and on the Series X that I probably wouldn't have on something like a Switch. And while we've even covered rumors of a all digital Switch without any physical cartridge, and I do think that ultimately we may see that happen, I also think that Nintendo will likely be the last one to discontinue the retail boxes and a cartridge of some sort that you can still go pick up and buy. And while we've seen the physical editions get less and less stuff with them, you don't have books to go through anymore, instruction manuals like the good old days, then you could look at the artwork of the game and get a summary of the game in there. Yes, that's been gone for years and years now, and we're seeing less and less kind of effort and care around the physical releases, in my opinion, because you also have to keep in mind that while it is nice to have that cartridge as part of your collection, it's also not a fully completed game in many scenarios now, with games, major ones like Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, actually getting a very large day one patch that added in things like the intro screens and a lot of the end game content, meaning if you are somebody who is collecting for the Nintendo Switch 20 years in the future, or even 10 years in the future, and and Nintendo decides to take the servers offline, like we're seeing them fastly decommission the Wii U era and 3DS eShops, well, yes, you are going to be in a scenario where you cannot potentially experience an entire game just because you came across it physically too late. Whenever you cannot connect to those servers anymore and there is no more data to be downloaded, you get whatever the developer shipped as day one. So we are ultimately going to be in a situation where I think we see developers and publishers and companies alike focused more on getting that game ready for launch on the digital storefront day one. Whatever patches have to hit doesn't matter because it is day one and you can still do that and you don't have to update an existing game. And we see less and less support and the focus around shipping a completed project in retail packaging, which ultimately will defeat some of the attraction of having a physical game collection, because that's the nice thing. If I want to go boot up the NES right now and play those games in a completed form, I absolutely can. But as we see this shift towards the more digital side of things picking up, and as you have a whole new generation of gamers that are growing up that don't have any of the nostalgia for walking into the stores, looking at the box art and walking out with your physical media in hand, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to spend additional time to go out and find the game when they can just hop into their storefront and download it. So I really want to hear from you guys on this particular topic, your thoughts and opinions around it. It is very interesting to see games like Modern Warfare 2 ship a disc with 70 megabytes, and it definitely seems like it paints that picture that yes, indeed, we are seeing a big industry level shift towards digital only. And while I'm not opposed to digital collecting at all right now either, I also see it as a more convenient option, but a temporary option, meaning that if you want to boot up your console 15, 20 years in the future, like I still do with the SNES, N64, and various other consoles that I own, well, it is a lot harder to do that and make sure that you have those same games intact when the servers may ultimately be decommissioned. But regardless of your thoughts and feelings on everything we talked about today, I do look forward to hearing from you all in the comments down below before you leave the video, as I do look forward to getting a back and forth conversation started with you all around these topics. Go watch Friday's video next if you haven't already, where I share my very early gameplay impressions around Bayonetta 3. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn on your notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next video.